What's going on, boys and girls? So we are here with another Linux reaction video, and this one is from Xiomaro, and he posted a video originally probably a month ago, give or take, called "Is Linux Ready for Gaming in 2019?" And he was actually very honest and open about it, which was nice to see. It's refreshing that someone doesn't have their own head shoved up their own sphincter, aka their own ass. So I'm curious to see. This is an update to that video, so let's roll into it and see what he's got to say as far as, is Linux ready for gaming in 2019 after a few more weeks of using it.
Hello everyone, my name is Xiomaro and welcome back to the channel. So a couple of weeks ago I made a video talking about my switch from Windows to Linux and how the gaming experience is in 2019. Honestly, I just made the video because it was something I wanted to talk about and I didn't really expect that much of a response to it. But as it turns out, the Linux community is crazy supportive of new users, which is really cool, and the video got a way bigger response than I anticipated. I plan to do this follow.
Just know, a good portion is crazy enthusiastic about new users. Not all. It's just about finding the right community. I'd recommend Big Daddy Linux Live. I'd recommend Destination Linux and Ask Noah. I would recommend... there are a bunch of other channels and areas to recommend. But it's all about the right community. Because we still have, let's say, bad actors who are not representative of the community.
Follow-up video anyway, but it also gives me a chance to answer some of the questions that were asked in the last one. So first off, am I still using Linux? And the answer is yes. However, I am still dual booting. I'm actually at the point where right now I'm using Linux for everything except video editing. And that may change soon because I've been looking at swapping out Premiere for DaVinci Resolve. So I'm still using Linux just as much as I was when I first switched a month ago. I have to be honest though, I have no plans to delete my Windows partition just yet. It's no fault of Linux, but some games will only work on Windows. The reason for that is almost always anti-cheat software, and while I'm a big fan of Linux, and I have been for many years now, losing out on playing a game I really want to play isn't worth it. I know that's not going to be the case for everyone. Some people are such ardent fans of Linux, or so determined not to support Microsoft in any way, shape or form, that they'll only support developers who support Linux, and I totally respect that, but that's not me. If I want to...
And as a Linux user, but also as a gamer, I totally support that decision. Because here's the thing. At the end of the day, it's your choice. Be the consumer you want to be. Like if you want to be a Linux user and support only, no text, no bucks crap, go ahead. But if you don't want to miss out on games that you are interested in, and you have to use it on a platform, a different platform, also totally understand that. There are people that I know, hey, they don't got Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 5. Guess what? It's a Windows thing. Oh, you can play it on console. How is that any different than playing it on a different operating system? So I totally respect that viewpoint, because how dare you bring logical, full thought process into things? That, how dare you? That, no, bad. No, I'm kidding, of course. No, it's a logical and very rational point of view. How dare you bring that into a technology discussion? Total sarcasm.
To play a game, I'm gonna play it. I'll obviously be much happier if I can play it on Linux, and I'll be sure to draw attention to it if I can, but I'm gonna boot back into Windows if there's something I really want to play. It's as simple as that. Luckily, the number of games that aren't playable on Linux is relatively small compared to what it used to be. So let's look at something I didn't get into too deeply last time. What is the performance like in games? And this is something I'd like to answer more thoroughly at a later date, but from some very unscientific testing that I've done, and by that I just mean eyeballing it, it seems like native games like CSGO actually run the same or maybe even slightly better on Linux, while non-native games like Overwatch, Battle.Right and Elder Scrolls Online receive a 10 to 15% performance hit by running them through Wine compared to natively on Windows. Obviously, that's going to vary from game to game. Some might be a little better than that, others might be slightly worse or maybe not run at all, and it's also going to depend on your specific hardware. For the record, I'm using a 4th gen i7 and a GTX 970. I've heard that Team Red has come on leaps and bounds in the last few years in terms of Linux drivers, but unfortunately I can't tell you firsthand whether you'd get better or worse performance with AMD gear compared to Intel and Nvidia. I've seen some benchmarks for native Linux games and it looks like AMD stacks up against Nvidia in a similar way to what they would on Windows. For non-native games, however,
Speaking as a Team Yellow, because I'm Team Green and Team Red, I have a machine that is all Ryzen based with dedicated, and I have a machine that is Intel and Nvidia. You are actually quite right. It's the best way to explain it is best out of the box experience has changed a little bit with recent announcements of like NVIDIA drivers being rolled into most like Ubuntu ISOs and Ubuntu based distro ISOs and stuff now. Generically, the no fuss way out of the box experience that is done in the spirit of open source would be the AMD way of doing things. You also get the ability to play with things like Wayland and whatnot. Those are the pros. AMD is a better team player when it comes to the rest of the community. NVIDIA, not so much. But with that being said, AMD has not exactly had the best track record for supporting Linux in new releases of hardware. Look at Navi, look at the 3rd gen Ryzen. They really need to fix their crap as far as that. And I like what AMD is doing. So the short answer is your best out of the box experience, no drivers, no nothing, and it just works potentially, is AMD. Sort of. If you got brand new hardware, probably not so much. I'd recommend Pop! OS if you're going to do that because, well, they actually don't have their head shoved up their ass when it comes to that. Unlike other distros, they are quite quick to fix things. So props to System 76 for that. Anyway, back to your video.
Actually don't know. So one thing I'd really appreciate you guys help with is, with my hardware, can I perform a benchmark on non-native games like I could with Fraps on Windows? I've had a few suggestions, but none of them work with my particular setup, or they only show your current frame rate. To clarify, what I'm looking for is something that can output a CSV file or something like that with my min, max, and average FPS over, say, 5 minutes. For OpenGL games, I can use GLX OSD. It's no longer being developed, but it still seems to work in CSGO. But for Vulkan, I've had no such luck finding an equivalent. Anyway,
as far as graphic tests, I would recommend Unigine. As far as if you're just looking for strictly Linux stuff, I would recommend any of the Unigine tests. They are available on Windows. You can do if you want to do cross comparisons, you can do Windows and Linux because they both work on said platforms. Just a recommendation, and they're both, and it's free on both. That's just running like synthetic benchmarks essentially. That's your your future mark scores and all that track. But you can also do like Geekbench and a bunch of other stuff too. So it all depends. Those are just some quick recommendations out there. I mean, as far as Frap stuff, I generically don't care. So but as far as like if you're looking for like benchmarking stuff, I'd recommend Geekbench and Unigine because you can use both on both OSs. Just my take.
quite pleased to find that my performance hit was only 10 to 15% in non-native games. For some people, any performance hit might be a deal breaker, but at least for me, the performance is still perfectly acceptable in the games that I play. And I do prefer using Linux for everything else, so I'm willing to take the hit. Something that's worth mentioning is that there are a few bugs I've run into that I don't get when I'm playing on Windows. Native games on Linux obviously had no such issues, but in Overwatch I've encountered 3 problems. One is crouch being bound to right control instead of left. Luckily I found a solution to that. Basically I just set Lutris to run a pre-launch command that swaps my left and right control when I start Overwatch. And that's something that could easily be added to the Lutris script at some point, so you may not have to do that manually in the future. The other 2 issues are actually a problem with Overwatch itself, but they're bugs that I don't personally encounter on Windows. One is my weapon seemingly locking up if I double click and then hold, like if I'm burst firing. For 90% of heroes it's not really an issue, but it's occasionally a problem on Soldier 76. This bug is apparently reproducible on Windows if you run certain software in the background like Plays TV, whoever uses that, I don't know. Personally, I've never seen this before, but it is a bug with Overwatch, not Linux. It is an issue though, and as far as I can tell, it affects all Linux users. Maybe there's something you can change in Wine to fix it, but there's a chance that the fix may have to come from Blizzard themselves. For the record, I've tried setting Wine to run in a virtual desktop, and I've tried forcing mouse warp override, but neither of them fix the problem. And the third issue I've run into is my FPS tanking after a few games. Again, this is an Overwatch bug, and luckily the fix is really easy. You just turn off reduce buffering in the video settings and then turn it back on again. This can happen on Windows too, and I've seen plenty of reports of people seeing this, but just like the double click and hold thing, I personally haven't seen it before on Windows. So the experience in Overwatch definitely isn't perfect, but I can totally live with it. Elder Scrolls Online, at least without add-ons, in my experience, is pretty flawless. I haven't run into a single issue that I wouldn't experience on Windows as well. With add-ons, however, I did run into one problem. I used to run an add-on for the guild traders called Awesome Guild Store. From my totally untrained diagnosis, it seems like one of the libraries that the add-on depends on is maybe trying to pull the system time from Windows or something. Honestly, I don't know the first thing about programming or scripting, so I could be totally off base there. But in any case, it just doesn't work. Battleright, rest in peace, has some stuttering issues. Some people suggested that it could be the shader cache being compiled, but I ran the game for a more extended period of time to rule that out, and unfortunately it seems like that isn't the problem. The game just has some stuttering issues, at least on my setup. Sadly, the game doesn't have very many players anymore, so it probably won't be a concern to many people. How many issues you run into will of course depend on the games you're wanting to play. A lot of games have no issues at all, especially games that have been whitelisted for Proton on Steam. Like I said, I'm gonna test all of this more thoroughly at a later date, but from my eyeball test, for the most part, stuff works pretty well. And as I mentioned, pretty much all of these issues disappear if you're playing native games. So here's a question you might be asking: should I switch to Linux? Honestly, it really depends. From a selfish point of view, I would love for more people to switch to Linux because, well, I think if the community hits a critical mass, we could see a tipping point where more developers actually start to prioritize natively supporting Linux, and more games supporting Linux would mean more Linux users, which would be great. But on the other hand, you have to look at it from a software-first perspective. Are you going to be able to do everything you need to do on Linux? And if the answer to that is no, is there an alternative that works on Linux that suits your needs? If the answer is still no, then switching full-time is probably going to be a no-go for you. The things you need to do on your computer should always take priority. Dual booting.
There you go again. You're being reasonable. Why? Oh, wait. Reasonable is good. My bad.
Is always an option, of course. You can quite easily have Windows and a Linux distro installed on your computer at the same time like I do. Of course, that's gonna mean reduced disk space for both operating systems, but most people have gigantic hard drives these days, so you probably won't care. But the other downside to dual booting is having to reboot when you need to use something in the other operating system. Another option is running Windows software in one.
Another option, just gonna throw that out there. If you're using programs that are on both platforms, won't matter because it's a tool. Just because really at the end of the day, like you said, it's about getting work done. So if you're, say, example, using Kden Live to do video editing on Linux and you happen to be in Windows, you can use Kden Live to do editing in Windows. Yeah, like I said in my last video, it's more about the software experience. That's why I recommend that really at the end of the day, what you have for a table doesn't matter as long as you have the right tools on the table. The table can be wood, plastic, whatever. Can you still use those tools on the table?
Wine or a virtual machine. For some stuff, that's super easy to do and it works flawlessly. For other things, either it might not work or you'll receive a performance hit. Whether that performance hit is worth it really depends on you. You can also do something called GPU pass-through, which lets the guest operating system use your physical GPU. But first of all, you need a particular setup to achieve that, and secondly, setting that up might be technically beyond some users.
I do appreciate you actually mentioning the technical limitations of that, and the like that you need a certain setup, that you need to do certain things, etc. And it does take a certain amount of technical knowledge to do that. So it might not be the best option. Might be an option for those with a more technically inclined mind to do. So props on you for that.
If, on the other hand, all of your software either works on Linux natively or you're happy to use the alternatives, I really can't recommend Linux enough. There are so many great distros out there that there's something for everyone. My personal recommendation for a first-time Linux user is Manjaro. Reason being, it's easy to install, all of your important drivers and software you might need for gaming are ready to go without needing to enable or add extra repositories, and you have access to basically everything Linux has to offer right out of the box. Plus, I'm a little biased because I use Arch, by the way. I just love the...
Okay, I would personally, and this is as someone who, my production machine is Manjaro based. So, I would not recommend to a new user a rolling distro. Just gonna throw that out there. I wouldn't recommend Solus. I wouldn't recommend Manjaro. If I'm gonna give a new user a distribution, it's probably gonna be something like Pop! OS, Elementary, Deepin, something along those lines, where they can. The rolling mentality of software is great to have. But on the same note, it can also bite you in the ass, as Manjaro has done more than once in my occasion, or Solus has done, etc. That it's not always the best option for everybody. For a lot of people, I think system stability and just having the software work is more important for them. So those are just my recommendations. I love Manjaro. I'm using it now. But new users, I'm a little more touchy on. Again, personally, for me, I would probably recommend Pop! OS above them all because it does have a better user focus, i.e., NVIDIA drivers are available out of the box. There's a lot of better out of the box experience than a lot of the other stuff. Lutris is available. There's a lot of other stuff that makes Pop! OS actually a really good choice. So, again, that's just difference. It depends on the user, of course, so make the recommendation based on the user and what they need and expect. Latest and greatest software, put them on a rolling. If they expect it, if you don't want a lot of, they don't want a lot of maintenance, put them on a static release. That's just my recommendation.
The Arch Wiki, Package Manager, AUR, and all that good stuff. And Manjaro can make use of pretty much all of it, with a much quicker installation process to boot. Of course, feel free to tell me how wrong I am down below. I know there are loads of good distros out there that would be equally good for a first time.
And just a recommendation. It's cool that I'm not sure if you actually use Arch, but if you're a Manjaro user and you say you use Arch, I applaud you for the trolling that will do to Arch users, because that'll drive them up a fucking wall. Because like straight Arch users tend not to really care for Manjaro users. Just gonna say, because to them, Manjaro is not Arch. But it's Arch based, but it's not Arch. So I prefer the way you troll. So awesome props to the trolling. Like that's my view of it.
User. So go ahead and explain why your distro is better. So finally, is Linux gaming ready in 2019? And the answer is, with some caveats, yes. If we're talking about native games, honestly, I think Linux might actually be a better operating system for gaming. I truly believe that. It's more lightweight, it's more customizable, and in some cases you even get better performance than on Windows. But software support, while it's much better than it's ever been, continues to be an issue. If the games you want to play aren't playable on Linux, you are still stuck with Windows, I'm afraid. Or if the games you want to play aren't native, but they do work through Wine, but you're barely scraping acceptable frame rates on Windows, Linux might not be for you either because of the aforementioned 10 to 15% performance hit. But with all that being said, if we're judging Linux purely based on its capability as an operating system for gaming, it is more than capable, and in many ways it far exceeds the competition. And for me personally, with the games I'm playing right now, it more than meets my needs. So I'll be continuing to use Linux for the foreseeable future. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more gaming guides, news, and discussion. And don't forget to check out the links below to Patreon, Discord, and Twitch. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.
So, Xiomaro, thank you for actually having a reasonable expectation and a reasonable view of things, because those that usually venture from the outside stumble in with the expectations that, this is all gonna work the same way. And when it doesn't, they get mad and annoyed and pissed off. So I find it really refreshing when people come in with that open mind, because it comes in, that open mind brings a level of understanding that this is going to be different. This is not what I'm used to. I can't expect it to be the same. And to me, that's totally the way and the mentality you need to take. So I believe I'm with you. Linux is ready in 2019. It's got a few caveats depending on the person, and you are correct there as well. If gaming is your thing and you want every game to work, and here's the thing that most Windows fanboys, Linux sucks, you can't play X, Y, or Z games. How many games in that Steam library can't you play on Windows because something doesn't work? I can think of a half dozen right off the top of my head. River of Time is one of them. It's part of the Dark Eye franchise. Can't play that because, according to Windows, it's too old. And that's on Windows 10. So, the irony that people love to talk about, like, I can play everything on Windows. Mostly. If you say everything, you're saying everything. You're full of shit. But if you want the biggest catalog of potential games to play, Windows is your area to go. That is not to say that the catalog for Linux is small by any means. And this is coming from somebody who remembers when we only had 2 AAA titles. Now we have many, many more available to us. We have almost 10,000 fucking games. Between, if you add in the Steam Play and the Proton DB stuff and the 6,000 plus games on Steam, and not mentioning any other like H or GOG or any other available clients that work, that's a pretty big list. Then you add in Lutris, which again, it's like Proton, hit or miss. That is a lot of games in the last 6 years. Yeah, that makes up a lot of traction. Because again, this is somebody who's been using Linux since '99. I remember Quake 3 in the middle tin. That was the Linux version. Neverwinter Nights, the original, coming out for Linux. So I totally vibe with what Xiomaro is saying, and I appreciate the open mind that he comes to it with, and he's actually giving sound advice, in that he understands that it's not going to be the right tool for everybody, and that it's okay if that's the case. But if you fall into it and you can live with certain things, it's totally the right tool and probably the better tool to use. So Xiomaro, keep up the good work, bud. I hope to see more Linux related videos from you. The rest of y'all, comment, rate, subscribe. All the Patreon, Inigala affiliates, all that stuff will be down below. Other than that, peace.